Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever it is that you are and wherever you may be. Thank you very much for making us a part of your day. I am Brad Franklin, a creative content writer here in Chesterfield. I'm very glad to tell you that Chesterfield Behind the Mic is on the air once again. Now, it is 2024. The calendar has turned, and with that, there are a lot of different things that sort of happen at the beginning of a year. One of the things I think that a lot of folks have kind of become more aware of in recent years is real estate assessments, and I thought it'd be a great idea to have a conversation about those, and I'm very glad to welcome Mel Bloomfield, who is the Director of Real Estate Assessments in Chesterfield. Mel, welcome to the podcast, sir. How are you?
I'm doing fine, bro. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, sir. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you coming on and talking to us a little bit about this. Before we dive into the weeds on how this all works, because I think this is a very important topic and a timely one, I'd love to, if you could give us a sense of your background and how you became the assessor in Chesterfield County. And I like to always kind of start with like giving folks an idea of who it is I'm talking to and like why, how it is they came to be sitting across from me. But how did you end up in this kind of line of work, and how did you end up being the director of assessments here in Chesterfield?
Sure. Probably around when I was about 21 years of age, my first property that I purchased, my first home, was a duplex.
Okay.
And I bought that more intuitively, thinking about what would be the best thing for me and my family. We lived in one unit and we rented the other. And that started my passion for real estate.
Right.
Getting acclimated to mortgage lending folks and title companies and surveyors and appraisers. Right. All that whole industry, it was something that fit well for my personality,
right.
Especially in terms of the analytical things, because I was doing things because it made sense to me without
right.
knowing the formal way of doing it. Once
right.
I got the formal training, then it was easier for me to transition.
Right.
So probably around 97, 98, I became an appraiser and started doing fee work for banks and mortgage companies that sort, and did that for probably 5 or 6 years
right.
through the first recession, 2002, somewhere in that area.
Right.
And around 2004, there was an opening in the city of Richmond for an appraiser. So I went to work for the city of Richmond in 2004. From there, I progressed through that to become a supervisor. And then probably the last 4 or 5 years there, I was a deputy assessor. And then the job opening came up in Chesterfield
right.
County as the director here, and
right.
applied for that, and here I am.
And so that was last year?
That was I came here in October of 21.
21, okay. Because I feel like, I started in August of 21, so I knew it was somewhere in there, but I also feel like I've been here a lot longer than I actually have. But I guess that's just sort of the nature of things. Now, in terms of real estate assessments, that's of course just one piece of the bigger puzzle in terms of the boards of supervisors sets the tax rate and that kind of thing. But in terms of the assessments themselves, talk to the folks about sort of how that process works. Take us through what exactly the county assesses, how often you guys do it, and what kind of tools you have at your disposal, including staff, to be able to get all this done.
Well, I guess the important thing is that we understand what appraising is
right.
and some of the components of how you do it. And there are 3 approaches to appraising real property, and it's using market value, which is sales comparison, which most
right.
people are familiar with.
Right.
The cost approach is basically valuing the sticks and bricks plus the land, which is what insurance companies use to set your homeowners insurance
right. policies.
Right. And then the income approach, which is used in terms of valuing the cash flow into a property. You
right.
can use that. In Chesterfield County, most localities in Virginia are on a 1-year cycle.
Right.
We appraise every 1 year,
right.
every annual year, and we use all historical information, sales that has happened, which is the bread and butter for what you can really
right.
hone in on what the typical buyer is doing in
right.
the market, and
right.
that's really what you want to get your handle on.
Yep. Now, in terms of staff, is it? I'm hoping it's not just you.
No,
you're not running around. And there's a whole lot of people in houses at Chesterfield.
Right.
But from a staffing standpoint, what kind of staffing do you guys have, and what kind of tools do you use to do a lot of the work you do?
Right. In staffing, we do have appraisers at every level. Some may be junior appraisers and starting level on trainees. Some may be more senior level,
right.
More journeyman type, and we have commercial appraisers as well, along
right. with
the managers and supervisors, depending on what locality and how we're set up. But here in Chesterfield, right. we have a staff of those who also do office management work.
Yep.
We have also the automation folks, also
right.
title examiners and things of that nature
right.
that help us do the work. in terms of the tools that we use, the difference between assessment work and fee appraising. Fee appraising is I'm going to look at your house. I'm not really concerned about the value of your neighbor's house, anything else.
Right.
And assessment work is more, I need to figure out how to create a equitable distribution of tax debt across the spectrum properties.
Okay.
And so you do that mostly by using more statistical analysis.
Okay.
You're looking at things in a more more macro level way to try to figure out how to model properties in such that you can figure out more likely than not what is the more probable price, market value of this particular property.
Right.
Now, I just want to make note is that people use the term fair market value in a lot of different ways.
Right.
But fair is not really a market value term.
Right.
Fair is just for taxational purposes.
Right. I got you.
If you're trying to market something, you want to get as much as you can.
Right.
For whatever you're selling. Right. Which is another tool. The definition is also where you're looking for an arm's length transaction. Right. Meaning me and you, you are selling, I'm buying, you're trying to get the best you can, I'm trying to get the best, the best deal we can. Right. Putting it out in the market to everyone has an opportunity to actually bid on it, give you an offer, you can accept it, not accept it. Right. So by you just not accepting it doesn't mean that it's not worth it. You just not saying, I don't want to take your offer. That's fine. That's market value. Right. The fair part comes into how do you fairly take that transaction once it happens to then distribute it amongst similar properties in a population. So I'm taking a sample of houses and then trying to distribute that sample across the population of houses, as we would do in any kind of surveying kind of techniques. So a lot of appraisers are using techniques from other industries. It's not synonymous with just appraising. It's industry-wide. It could be from manufacturing to industrial to transportation, what have you. Yeah, that's interesting. Now, in terms of the last few years, it certainly feels like a lot of folks have been more mindful of assessments because of the what has happened in the market. So before we specifically talk about the 2024 assessments, I was hoping maybe we could talk about that recent history and the why behind the assessments having gone the way they have. Is it strictly just because the folks decided to spend a bunch of money on houses? Is that as simple as it gets, or is it more complex in terms of why the assessments have gone the way they've gone? It's basic economics. It's what it really is, because this turn didn't just happen. It started when we came out of recession from 8 to around 13 was when we saw the drop off, and we saw foreclosures rise. Right. Well, around 14, the turn began to happen, where prices had begun to move, and the interest rates were still attractive enough that people were able to still get into the market at that time. So that began to drive it. That was the driving forces. So as the interest rates began to become more attractive, then that drove people, more sellers, that drove more buyers into the market. That interaction is what we deal with every day. We are voting with our dollars. So if you're trying to chasing if there's more buyers than sellers, then that's going to have an inverse reaction to the cost of property, the homes. And then with an attractive interest rate, so if it said, hey, the interest rate, I can get a 3.5% interest rate, I can push harder. I can go heavier on a property. I can afford more. So those are the dynamics that happened. And it's nothing wrong with that's the way it works. That's capitalism. That's exactly what it is. It's how our market works. Some people may say, well, they paid too much for it. Well, if I have 50 people trying to get this same product, is it somebody crazy? It can't be 50 crazy people. It was just what the market is dictating. Even now, with the dynamic now, even with the rise in interest rates, it hasn't quite stopped that momentum. It has slowed down the sellers from selling, because if you refinance from 19 to 22, you may not want to give up that 3-4% interest rate to get a higher interest rate. You said, hey, I'm gonna stay put. Well, what happens if you have 100, if you had 100 buyers, qualified buyers at the time, and you lost 50 of them during a particular time, there's still 50 out there trying to track one particular, because there's less sellers now putting out the market.
And there's also less new stuff coming online too, because of all the different supply constraints and all the different pieces of that too. So it seems like that piece of pressure made the situation, in a way, you could say worse, but essentially, like you said, that's just the way the process works.
Yeah, it didn't. From our perspective, and looking at COs that happened throughout, it didn't fall off much. So because those that had stuff in the pipeline continued to build, they just managed to keep going and managed to keep doing it. They might have lost some deals because it didn't work financially for people, but they didn't stop and say, "Hey, we got this whole subdivision section that we're not going to do." They're still doing them. They just figuring out some other creative ways to get it done.
Gotcha. Now, in terms of the 2024 assessments, what kind of data are you seeing, and how do things look for the assessment that folks are going to get in 2024?
It's looking about the same as it was last year. It's nothing has really changed much. We have not seen any drop offs in sale prices because of the dynamic of sellers. Sellers are still ruling in some regard. I made a statement at one time during the board of the board of supervisors meeting, my first meeting there, and told them is that at some point the leverage may switch. Well, at this point the leverage has not switched, even though the rates are higher. We are as consumers, we see an interest rate point. We say 7% maybe. Okay, that's too much. But once it falls to 6 point something, then people start to say, "Hey, let me jump back in." And so I think the sweet spot will still move if the rates end up between 6 and 6.5 settled, that will still spur enough activity that people who still want to sell, and those that are there's still buyers outpacing sellers. Hence why we have so many multifamily properties being built, because there's still people that need housing.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be in that deficit for some time, even with the level of building that's happening now.
And so that deficit, I guess, is fueling a lot of where the assessments have gone, because there's those market forces are sort of at odds a little bit. Now, in terms of what is rolling out, when people get their assessments, what does it actually sort of look like? What are they expecting to see? And I don't necessarily mean that in a numbers way. I'm saying because a lot of us, it's our real estate taxes are sort of paid through escrow, right? And so, for a lot of folks, you might get something from the county that says, "Hey, here's your assessment, and here's your previous years," or whatever. But what that looks like, it's not actually a bill because it gets paid differently. But in terms of what residents actually get, take us through sort of what that looks like. What are they actually receiving?
Well, the notices have your last 3 years on it, whatever the tax rate.
And is that like a state?
Is that like a
state
statute?
Okay,
yes,
that's what I figured.
State statute changed and had us put all 3 years to give the property owners some estimate of what they could expect. It's an estimate because there's still a moving target in terms of what the tax rate may be for that particular year. However, you get a sense of, okay, my assessment move, what is percentage of increase from one year to the next is what you're trying to give them the ideal of. Those are the things that we try to be as upfront and accurate, because this is something that's especially for residential folks, this is the more emotional, because this is their home. And so I'm sensitive enough to understand that. So it's not from our perspective, and my perspective especially, it's not adversarial. If there's an issue, problem, give us a call, talk with us about it, and we'll see what the issue may be, if we're right or wrong. But we want to get people the right information, because we find out that people, in a lot of instances, don't really care about the activity in their neighborhood, even though that matters. They just concerned about their property, but without understanding that activity, that sales activity, that market activity is impacting.
It played a role.
It's playing a role. It's not the appraiser saying this is what I think it is. It's the appraiser reading the tea leaves saying this is what other buyers are doing. If I'm comparing apples to apples situation, even if it's an apple to orange, I need to make adjustments
based on what those fruit are doing.
And try to make it as comparable as I can to say, okay, you could be a little under or over this particular property, but if this is an average house in your neighborhood and selling for this amount, then more likely than not, you should be able to accomplish the same level.
Right. And that kind of leads perfectly into what I was going to ask next, which was about the appeals process, because I know folks, what comes from the county in terms of the assessment is not the end all be all. They get an opportunity, like you said, to call you guys.
Absolutely.
What options do they have to appeal, and how does that process work if they decide that they want to appeal?
Well, once you get your notice, there's a number on there. You can give us a call up, find out who's the appraiser. We'll get you in contact with the appraiser in your neighborhood, and you can have a discussion with them. And discussion, as I said, is not adversarial. Most folks, when they see it, sometime will be a little taken back.
Right. Because then you're actually able to present the data to them as to why
this is
because really the assessment doesn't really say anything about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the assessment itself doesn't say like, here are the reasons why the assessment is this. The assessment just says, here's the assessment. So this conversation gives them a chance to really get that data. And it's really, I guess, the only way for them. There's no easy way for that conversation to be had other than just to have that conversation, I would imagine.
So those who have access, who are computer literate, and maybe not so much our oldest senior citizens who may not be able to have that knowledge, but can go onto a website. There's a list of sales, and you can pull them up based on your market area, your subdivision, and see what's happening. I would tell everyone else, if you know that, let's say Miss Molly's house across the street sold. To be curious about what it sold for. If you can set your own and say, well, I just renovated my kitchen, my bath. My house was then better than Miss Molly's house. How far off is the assessment?
Yeah.
That's important to know that, because then that even understanding the tax implication. And this is the difference between being a fee appraiser and being an assessor.
Right.
Is that I've been on both sides, to where as a fee appraiser, I go out there, you looking for refinancing, doing maybe pulling out some cash out of the property, some HELOC, or to start a business, and you need the highest value for your property, because this is your wealth now. We're talking. So you'll tell me everything great about the property, everything great about the neighborhood.
Right.
But the opposite is true because it has a tax implication to it.
Right.
And I try to tell people all the time is that here in Chesterfield County, I am not the tax assessor. I don't assess taxes. I know that the vehicle that we're creating may impact what you pay. Right. But there's another process to that.
Which is, separate.
Separate. Right. But together. Right. So if you have a problem with your valuation, then I can have a conversation with you about it. Right. If it's about the taxation of that, if you have a sense that I refinanced 2 years ago, and wow, the assessment is about what they refinanced, the appraiser told me 2 years ago, and they just getting there, then there's really not a lot of argument there. Right. Yeah. You can be disappointed about it. Right. But it's not an argument there to be made.
Right. You don't have any wiggle room.
I don't have any wiggle room with that, especially if you know it. Right. If there's some issues with your property, I guess additional issues where interior that we may not see, may not know, by all means, call us up. We'd be happy to come out there and look at the property, do a valuation on your property to be able to see something that might impact the value of the property. Some things could be just cost to cure, how much it costs to fix a crack in the wall. Right. It may be minimum in terms of what people are willing to pay. Right. Because now, think about, as we just said, if there's a shortage of properties, people will be willing to take on that additional expense to correct small fixes on your property to get it at a price to even get into the market. So they're willing to still pay you for it, just because there's some problem with it that doesn't stop people from buying your property.
Right. Let me get you out here on this one. I was just curious if there are any sort of questions that you get sort of regularly that we haven't touched on, or even, misconceptions that you think people have about the process or about assessments in general that you hope we can sort of help give them some better understanding or better information about now having heard this. What are the biggest misconceptions that you get? What are some of the questions that you get, and what are your typical answers to those things?
Well, one of the biggest ones I just mentioned was about the real estate assessing a real estate versus taxing the real estate. I think I try to let people understand that process. I'm not the taxing authority. You can be upset about the increase, but is it accurate? That's my first. Right. I want to know, because I wanted to make certain that it's accurate and it's fair across the spectrum of population of properties in your neighborhood. Right. If we've achieved that, then at that point, there's not a lot more that we could do in terms of that. There are other helps for our seniors. The Board of Supervisors and Dr. Casey has done a great job in terms of creating those vehicles for tax credits for people to help them out in those situations. So I want people to avail themselves of that stuff, because you deserve that. That is yours. It's not something that's given to you. You've earned that, so you are entitled to that. Overall, I just want people to understand the process, and when they call us up, knowing that my staff is not here in an adversarial position to hurt anyone, to give us the facts, give us the information, and let us analyze it again and see what the issues may be. If we can do something and it makes sense, then we'll do it. Keep change it, move on. If there isn't, then we'll respond and such and let you know why we can't do it as well.
Good deal. Well, Mel, thank you very much for coming on the podcast, talking to us about the assessments. I know it's a very intricate, complex. You sound there's a lot of data behind a lot of what you just kind of talked about over the last 20 minutes or so. But I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about it.
I appreciate having me, Barrett. Thank you.
All right. Make sure you check us out on social media. On Twitter, it's at Chesterfield VA, and on Instagram, it's Chesterfield Virginia on Word. And if you're on Facebook, just check out our podcast page. Search Chesterfield Behind the Mic. Now, make sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Overcast, or wherever it is that you get your shows. And if you're so inclined to give us a rating or review, we'd greatly appreciate it. As always, a video version of the show is available on our YouTube channel as well as on our website at Chesterfield.gov/podcast. That's also where you can submit feedback anytime, make suggestions, or just reach out to us. You can also watch the show on WCCT Thursday through Sunday at 7, and on the weekends at noon, that's Comcast Channel 98 and Verizon Channel 28. And lastly, check out Chesterfield.gov/connect with us to find out a number of other ways to connect with Chesterfield County. My thanks to my director, Martin Stith, my executive producer, Teresa, Bonifas, and all the good folk from Constituent and Media Services for all they do. And my thanks to you for joining us today. So from all of us here in Chesterfield, thanks again for making us a part of your day. We'll see you again real soon. Take good care. From blogs to podcasts, and I'm very glad to tell you that Chesterfield Behind the Mic is on the air once again. Newsletters to alerts, social media, the latest community news.
Welcome to the latest installment of This Week in Chesterfield.
How to get in touch, and everything in between. If you want to know about Chesterfield County, our Connect With Us webpage has you covered. Chesterfield.gov/connect with us. Connect with us, your source for all things Chesterfield.